have a friend who has struggled a bit to getting gear as a writer, despite having some great ideas for his series. One of the things he struggles with is the first line, such as figuring out what it should be, how to make it, if what he made was good, etc. I know this isn't an uncommon issue. In my Discord, one person who had a decent opening line mentioned how difficult it is to pull off the opening. And when I held an open invitation to offer some opening sentences for this video, almost none of them were strong enough to point to as examples to learn from. Or at least, most of the non-professional ones weren't. The professional ones ran awry a common misconception I wish to warn people about. Regardless, from what I've seen and experienced, getting a solid first line down can be stressful for many writers, but it doesn't have to be. With the knowledge I'll share in this video, you can nail your opening line and proceed with confidence that you've hooked the audience in the small window of opportunity you have. Not only do I have expert advice from novelist K.M. Weiland, but I've also got over 40 actionable tips which can help you get started. But before I give you either of those, let's clear up some misconceptions about opening lines. While I'm going to teach you how to do stuff like this, I don't want you to worry about making openings like this.
It was the best of times, it was the worst of times. It was the age of wisdom, it was the age of foolishness. It was the epoch of belief, it was the epoch of incredulity. It was the season of light, it was the season of darkness. It was the spring of hope, it was the winter of despair.
Or this.
Long time ago in a dimension far, far away, there was a collective of midgets fighting over a human snack, who have nothing at all to do with our story, which really began in a small and very unhygienic bedroom of what humans call New York.
Or even this, despite how much I enjoy it.
The building was on fire and it wasn't my fault.
I'm not saying any of these are bad opening lines. Far from it. I just don't want you to feel like you must use these types of lines. You don't have to impress people with your opening line. It doesn't have to be dazzling. Most, in fact, aren't. Very few opening lines are memorable, yet they still do the job. Here's a few examples from books I've read.
The girl watched, helpless, as the world turned red beneath her.
Takoya Port was a town easy to overlook.
Nova had been collecting syringes from the alleyway behind the apartment for weeks.
Now, the opening line does have to hook, and I will be going into what hooks soon, but far too many get obsessed with making these supposedly perfect opening lines. If you can make a line that's funny or gets across some deep philosophical truth, that's nice, but I don't want you to feel like you must aim for that. That's a maximizer mindset. I don't preach maximizer mindsets because, as psychologist Barry Schwartz and several of his colleagues best found, maximizing feeds into perfectionism. With maximizers, anything less than the best or pinnacle is treated as a failure, which creates anxiety and leads to procrastination. And as I've learned from reading The Anatomy of a Breakthrough, the whole don't lower your standard for anything viewpoint doesn't work when you're trying to get unstuck or find satisfaction. That's why so many who strive for the best all the time are plagued with anxiety that stops them from making progress in the first place. I want you to succeed as a writer, so I'm not going to send you down that path. Instead, we're going to aim for the sweet spot below maximizing everything, but above inefficiency and expecting just anything to work. What we're going to focus on is being functional and being efficient. As to how I know if something's a functional opening or not, aside from feedback from those I respect, I turn to K.M. Weiland's 5 elements of a riveting first line. These elements are 1. An inherent question, 2. A character, 3. The setting, 4. The tone, and 5. A sweeping declaration. As for why and how, let's break it down into parts. Part 1. The inherent question. Great first lines make you curious. They're like teasers, leaving you with questions that you just need answers to. Why is something happening? What's going on? They hook you by not giving away everything up front. Of these 5 elements, I'd argue that this is the most crucial. Making the reader wonder about things is what pushes them to continue onwards for answers. Just don't forget that the question is meant to be somewhat invisible. Here, I'll show you what I mean. Using the novel I'm working on right now, The Ties That Blind.
Cassidy wished that impersonation was as easy as the Payday Chronicles film series made it appear, with latex masks, stolen outfits, and quick changes. But unfortunately, the reality was much more taxing and time-consuming.
With this, the invisible questions here are, why does Cassidy wish to impersonate someone? And what situation is she in that makes this necessary or desirable? If you want to pull this off yourself, here's 10 actionable tips I've put together. 1. Begin your story in the middle of an action or a situation, as this can naturally raise questions. Here's an example from Uncharted: The Fourth Labyrinth.
Tropical birds scattered as Drake veered the Jeep onto an old rutted track, snapping branches and tearing away vines, plowing through the rainforest with killers in pursuit, bullets flying, a gorgeous but pouty girl in the passenger seat, and a bitch of a headache.
2. Present a dilemma or an issue in the first line. Conflict is inherently interesting and prompts questions. Here's an example from a book I just started, Never Send Roses.
They gave Harmony pills for the pain. She didn't take them.
3. Open with something paradoxical or contradictory. Here's an example I wrote using Dororora as an inspiration.
Shizuo hated violence with every fiber of his being, yet his hands were the most feared weapons in all of Ikebukuro.
4. Use unusual or specific details. Specificity can be very intriguing. Again, another example I made.
The last time I saw my brother, he was arguing with a man dressed as a pink flamingo.
5. Suggest that something has recently changed or is about to change. Another quick example from me.
Ever since the new mirror was hung in the hallway, Emily noticed her reflection was always a second too slow.
6. Start with something unexpected or shocking to immediately engage curiosity. Here's an example from Monster Hunter International.
On an otherwise normal Tuesday evening, I had the chance to live the American dream. I was able to throw my incompetent jackass of a boss from a 14th-story window.
7. You can imply that there's something hidden to be uncovered. Here's another thing I threw together.
The old house on Maple Street was never silent, despite it being empty.
8. You can present an opening that's out of the ordinary.
The day started ordinarily enough, until I saw a fish swimming through the air on my way to school.
9. You can start with an emotional statement that begs for an explanation.
Hearing Anne's laughter again, 5 years after her funeral, chilled Jason to the bone.
10. You can use an unreliable or unique narrator. Someone with an unusual perspective or unreliable nature can create questions. For me, when it comes to unique voices, my mind instantly goes to Lena Inverse from Slayers.
So there I was, tearing through the woods at top speed, a gang of murderous bandits hot on my tail.
Having said all that, don't feel the need to do every single one of these. Figure out which one best fits your story. Now, as important as all that was, we're only getting started. Remember, there's 4 more elements to a riveting first line. So, let's go to the one I look to for the most. Part 2. Character. This is your first meet and greet. If the character is named right off the bat, even better. It's like a direct handshake, making you feel more connected. Speculative fiction writers, I want you all to pay attention to this the most. I have run into countless people who start their fantasy or sci-fi story with an info dump about their world history or magic system, and I feel like they're so wrapped up in their own enjoyment that they fail to consider the value of said information to the audience. Nobody has any reason to care about your world or your system until you've given them a reason to care. And you give them a reason to care through your characters. As the law of writing for strangers best states with the 5th law, the best way to introduce every element of your story is from your hero's point of view. The reason why people aren't likely to care out the gate is because there is nothing to gauge the information from. Without emotions, everything is neutral. We have no way of discerning what matters and what doesn't, and thus, we have no reason to care. We need an anchor to filter this information through, who this information matters to. Thus, we need to start with a character first and introduce your world or magic or so on through their interactions with it, on top of what it means to them. Their perceptions color, or perceptions. Beyond that, character is the thing which hooks people the most. Character is king. People aren't looking for great stories early on. They're looking for great leads. So, with that in mind, here's some additional techniques you can employ when focusing from a character angle. 1. Introduce a unique character trait. Start with a line that highlights something distinctive or quirky about your character.
Rebecca could pickpocket a wallet as easily as most people tied their shoes.
2. Show the character in action. Begin with your character doing something interesting or unusual. This is one of those things that overlaps with the in medias suggestion.
As the competition clock ticked down, Erina Nakiri plated her signature dish with the precision that reflected her unmatched culinary finesse.
3. Reveal a desire or goal. Let the reader know what your character wants right away. I'm going to use Velvet Crow from Tales of Berseria for an example.
Velvet Crow burned for revenge.
4. Present a defining moment. Start at a moment that is crucial for your character. I'll use Velvet again, just to make a point that you can come at things from all kinds of angles.
Velvet's world shattered the night she witnessed Artorias, the man she once trusted, mercilessly take her brother's life.
5. Use a distinct voice or perspective. If your character has a unique way of speaking or seeing the world, let it shine through their first line.
When you're a spy, certain things come easy.
If there are any 2 things I recommend addressing first and foremost, it's to create an inherent question surrounding a character. Now, having said that, the thing I'd prioritize third is tone. Part 3. Tone. The first line should match the feel of the whole story. It establishes the reader's expectations and feel for the story. Not only is it important for consistency, but it's necessary for attracting the right audience to your story. You're going to want to align your tone to your genre, so here's what I'll recommend. Use suspenseful if you're writing thriller or a mystery. Use humor, sarcasm, or irony if you're writing something comedic, though it can be used to add levity to more serious stories. Use romantic for, well, romance. Romance or any genre where relationships are a focal point. If you're writing a drama, tragedy, or story dealing with loss, aim for a melancholic tone. Mysterious, meanwhile, works best with detective stories or any narrative where the unknown is a central topic. Nostalgic works well for historical fiction and stories that reflect a bygone age, while dark and foreboding often goes well with horror, dystopia, dark fantasy, and science fiction. The same goes for eerie and creepy stuff, with suspense also being thrown in for the eerie and creepy toned openings. If that's not your jam, say you want to make a feel-good story, you should aim for something hopeful and positive. Hopeful and positive also works with adventure narratives, and for those who mess around in the literary fiction territory, you're the ones I say go nuts with the more lyrical or poetic openings. Same with the thoughtful introspective tone. Really, that one is best when exploring the human condition. For the final 2, if you're going for a relaxed, casual tone, you should consider first-person narratives. And if you use something that's formal or scholarly, you should be working with historical narratives or stories that aim for a sense of authenticity or authority. As for how you can do it, here's what you do. 1. Choose your words carefully. The diction you use can immediately set the tone. For example, a dark, moody story would use words with heavier connotations. A light and fun story, meanwhile, would opt for playful or whimsical language. Here's an example to show what I mean. Dark.
Adrift in the gloomy sky, Sarah and Leo eyed the foreboding island through the mist.
Light.
Sailing through the azure skies in their makeshift balloon, Sarah and Leo exchanged excited grins as a lost island emerged on the horizon.
2. Use descriptive imagery. The way you describe stuff like a setting, character, or action will reflect the mood of your story. For instance, let's use this example from Tear Moon Empire's first chapter.
The sky was soaked in the crimson light of the setting sun that glared angrily from the horizon onto the grand square of the imperial city. At the center of this famed square loomed a guillotine, its crude and rusty blade dripping with blood.
3. You can incorporate figurative language, such as metaphors, similes, and other figures of speech that can be used to evoke the desired mood or give the reader a feel for the style of the story.
As the flavors as a delicious dish unfurled on his palate, Yo felt as if he was diving into an ocean of taste.
4. Again, starting with a strong emotion can help. The emotion you start with sets the tone big time.
In the dim light of their rundown shack, Denji held Pochita close. Their shared loneliness, a heavy blanket in the chill of the night.
5. You can also open with dialogue. The way characters speak to each other can immediately tell readers a lot about the mood and style of a story.
Be quiet, or they'll hear us, Maria hissed as shadows formed at the base of the stairway.
6. You can use sensory details. Acting can give an immediate sense of the story's atmosphere.
The cool air nipped at Kaito Kid's face as he stood on the building's edge.
7. You can use the rhythm and flow of your sentences to your advantage. Short, choppy sentences can convey stuff like urgency and tension, while longer, flowing sentences can be used for a more reflective or lyrical tone. Here's a short, choppy example.
Lights flashed, sirens wailed. She ducked, hid.
And for longer and flowing, see the whole, it was the best of time, it was the worst of time example at the beginning. I could come up with something, but I'm tired from finding and making examples, to be honest. But hey, if all this work is providing you with value and is a helpful resource, I'll be glad to hear it. I'd be even more glad if you could donate to the channel via the thanks button. Helping people in this field is one of the things I'd love to make a career of, but my ability to do so is dependent on the support of people such as yourself. If you can't afford to, that's fine. A simple press of the like button is appreciated as well, as are comments and so on. It's all about those little things that helps this channel become something more. Anyway, I'd argue that an inherent question, character, and tone are the highest in priority. The next two elements, not so much. Between setting and a sweeping statement, I'd argue that setting is the most important, so let's address that first. Part 4. Setting. These lines often set the scene and help anchor the reader into the actual visuals of everything. Well, everything I said before is still true. They can help in world-building centric genres for stuff with a historical or cultural context when the setting is a central element, as in, if the environment significantly influences the plot or the characters' lives, or with atmospheric narratives. With that last part, I recommend doing this only if the mood or atmosphere are a key component. The reason I put this on the lower end is because you can get away with not including this in the first line. For instance, if you're making a character-driven story, the opening line can focus on drawing readers into the character's inner world or situation before doing setting stuff. You can also withhold specific character details to create mystery or intrigue. If you're focused on themes, you also might need to immediately ground the story. Finally, sometimes delaying setting details can allow for a more flexibly paced storytelling. Us authors must choose the most opportune moment to unfold the setting. There doesn't have to be a rush. Looking at my example, for instance, I'm not explicit about it, but I do subtly establish that it's a contemporary setting by mentioning things like a film series. If you do want to mess with setting in the first line, here are my actionable tips. 1. Use vivid descriptions. Be specific and employ descriptive language to paint the setting. See the Chair Moon Empire example again. 2. Again, incorporate sensory details. Open your story in a way that engages the senses in an active way. See the Kaito Kid example. I don't want to make more examples if I don't have to. 3. Set the atmosphere with weather, since weather can be a powerful tool for establishing mood. Rain drummed relentlessly on the roof, echoing the gloom of the deserted Victorian mansion. 4. You can highlight a unique aspect of the setting that stands apart from the rest of it. In the heart of the bustling city lay a forgotten alley where time seemed to stand still. 5. Again, you can use metaphor or simile here, much the same as previously mentioned. The city sprawled before her like a canvas, splattered with neon and noise. 6. You can combine setting with action to show characters interacting with the setting. John trudged through the thick snow, the lights of the distant cabin his only beacon. 7. You can give a glimpse into the setting's historical or cultural background. Drums echoed through the village, signaling the start of the harvest festival. 8. If your story is set in a distinctive historical period or in the future, drop a hint about it. The skyline was alive with the ballet of hovercars weaving in and out of the vertical sprawl. 9. You can create contrast or conflict within the setting itself. In the heart of the bustling metropolis, a solitary, ancient oak stood defiant. And 10. Most importantly of all, which I recommend considering the most, you can start with a character's perception of the setting. Show the setting from the character's point of view. To Elena, the mountain which towered over her village wasn't just mere rock and snow. They were guardians of the town's ancient secrets. Just remember that you have to be careful about this, and overall, to try and incorporate all the other things first. Now last, we hit on a sweeping declaration. Part 5. Sweeping declarations. Some books start with a bold statement. And they're not just an old fact, but something that makes you go, huh, that's interesting. This can't just be any statement though. It should be something that's bold or provocative that grabs readers' attention and makes them curious to learn more and continue reading. I can mainly think of 3 reasons why someone would want to do this. First, you can use it to set a grand or epic tone in stories that are grand in scale or epic in nature, like with high fantasy or historical epics. This can help immediately convey the magnitude of the narrative. Second, if the narrative voice or perspective is a central element of your story, like with first-person or classical omniscient narratives, a sweeping declaration can help effectively establish this voice from the outside. Finally, if you want to introduce a central element or idea at the very beginning, this can be an effective way of doing so. Now, having said that, there are a host of reasons I wouldn't recommend doing this. For instance, you could end up overwhelming the reader or setting expectations for some epic, deeply thematic story that doesn't align with what you're making. In fact, if your story is heavily focused on character development or a personal journey, it's better to start with character-centric openings than some broad statement about the world or the theme. You could also risk veering into cliches or overused tropes, which would just make your story feel unoriginal right at the start. A statement that's too general or vague might fail to engage the reader effectively. Depending on what it is, you might even turn off a reader. If your story has a high degree of realism or is set in a contemporary setting, it could feel out of place or overly dramatic. Also, if your story relies on subtlety, nuance, or a slow build-up, a sweeping declaration might be too direct or overpowering at the beginning. And there's always the danger of you giving too much too soon with it, which can reduce the mystery or intrigue that might otherwise draw readers in. Finally, you could box the narrative into a certain tone or direction. Basically, it's a tool that needs to be used judiciously. For those who do want to use it, here's how. 1. You can make a bold or surprising statement, like an unusual observation or a counterintuitive claim.
In our village, birds sang only at night.
2. You can begin with a statement that sounds like a universal truth, but then give it some unique twist that sets the tone for your story.
They say love conquers all, but they've never met a heart like Eleanor's.
3. As said, you can use it to paint a broad, expansive picture that sets a stage for a grand narrative.
In the heart of the Shakir Desert, a secluded oasis held a truth so profound it threatened to upend a centuries-old reign.
4. You can make your statement something controversial or thought-provoking that piques curiosity.
In the beginning, the universe was created. This has made a lot of people very angry and been widely regarded as a bad move.
5. You can offer some deep, philosophical insight that reflects the themes or motifs of your story.
Dreams are the mirrors of the soul, revealing truths we dare not face in the light of day.
6. You can use statements that present a contrast or a paradox.
The louder the leaders spoke of morality, the more David saw their actions betray their words.
7. You can employ hyperbole for dramatic impact.
The silence in the aftermath of the battle was so profound, it drowned out all memories of noise.
8. You can start with a statement that ties into a historical or cultural aspect, giving a sense of depth or context.
Since the dawn of time, our people have feared the forest, and with good reason.
9. You can just use it to foreshadow events to come in the narrative.
If someone had told me that opening that book would unlock a world of magic and danger, I might have thought twice.
And 10. You can have a sweeping statement that reflects the POV's personality or worldview.
Chase understood from an early age that to be successful, you needed to be willing to go further than others thought possible.
Just remember that a sweeping statement should not only be impactful, but also relevant to the story you're telling. And that's why I list this lowest. Remember, implicit question is highest in importance, character second, tone third, and setting fourth. Keep that in mind, and I believe in your ability to create a solid opening line. Now, while I think this video is useful for creating opening lines, I recognize that this doesn't help people know what to pick as the opening itself and why. So, to get you better at starting things, that's the topic I'll address in my next video. If the video is already up, I recommend clicking and moving on to that topic. If not, subscribe so you know when that video is released.